Hello, my name is Gurpreet Dhillon. I'm a professor of information security at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. The topic of our discussion today is organizational power and cybersecurity. Organizational power plays a rather important role, particularly with respect to any kind of an implementation of information system security policy. This is because different actors, different stakeholders within an organization come into play with their own intentionalities, with their own motives and objectives that they might have. Because any kind of a security policy is perhaps going to change how different people report to each other, how different kind of rules get interpreted, how new rules get implemented, and as a result, the changing work patterns occur, and hence it becomes very important for different stakeholders to understand why certain rules are being changed, and they tend to exert power so that certain rules bend or are modified in their favor. So, power relationships in any kind of an organization, particularly with respect to security policy implementation, become very, very important and of paramount importance for any organization to come to grips with. And that is the topic of a discussion today, and that's what we will be evaluating as we go along in. There are four dimensions of power that need some understanding, and this is based on the work of a very renowned scholar who used to live first in Canada and now in Australia, Cynthia Hardy. What Cynthia Hardy talks about is four particular aspects of power which come into play together and interplay with each other, and as a result, manifest themselves in organization over a period of time. The first dimension is about resource based power, and this relates to political power over the range of resources that might be available in a given organization. Any individual or any group of individuals who control the resources obviously have some kind of a political power in that enterprise. If you are changing any kind of rule structures, particularly with respect to cybersecurity, which put either certain kinds of power in the hands of certain individuals or certain groups of individuals, those people are certainly going to be more powerful. This is an assertion that Cynthia Hardy makes as far as one of the dimensions of power is concerned. The second dimension that Cynthia Hardy talks about is process-based power, and it challenges the notion that decision process is open and a participation and participatory for all. If an individual or a group of individuals again controls certain processes as to how information flows or how certain things get done, then that group essentially is the owner of that particular process. So process ownership also lends itself to certain power getting accumulated in certain groups of people. The third dimension is that of meaning-based power. This prevents conflict by attributing meaning and proper indoctrination. Obviously, there's a good element to meaning-based power, which essentially says that there are multiple aspects of any kind of an interpretation, and our importance is in terms of attributing meaning to whatever that policy might be. Typically, it is the legal department which ends up interpreting all sorts of meanings for any kind of a policy, but those who kind of ascribe meaning to certain languages in any kind of policy do have some kind of a power. Only very recently, I was involved with one particular venture where there was a lot of ongoing executive time wasted in the role of what a simple comma means in a given sentence, because interpreted differently, it could mean that certain things could be done, and interpreted differently, it means certain things could not be done. And we ended up conflicting and thinking about all sorts of possibilities because of the use of a single comma. So, meaning based power resides in any kind of a system, in any kind of an institution, in any kind of an organization. So, when we are talking about cybersecurity policies and their implementation, it becomes very important to have absolute clarity in what a given thing means, what a given statement means, what kind of actions are going to be linked with a given statement. Those things are very, very important. Unfortunately, in many institutions, we tend to take these things lightly and leaving a lot of room for interpretation and argument, so which is necessarily not a best thing to do. And the final dimension of power that Cynthia Hardy talks about in her work is that of system based power. This is typically disciplinary in nature. And it shapes the organization belief systems. You can't really see system based power. It is embedded into the processes and the structures of the organization. It is a system of doing things. It is normatively driven to a large extent because it is going to shape the value systems and the beliefs that there are with respect to organizational power. So I think the combination of the four dimensions of power, the resource-based power, the process-based power, the meaning-based power, and the system-based power come together in a very interesting way to define how a security policy is viewed and reviewed in an institution, in an organization, and how well it's going to be accepted, how it is going to take shape over a period of time, and how it's going to be eventually. Associated with the dimensions of power is another fundamental construct that needs some understanding, and that is of intentionality. Um, when we talk about intentionality, it is really the collective intention of individuals who do not necessarily act in isolation, but they come together. It's the meeting of minds, it's the collective intention which hopefully results in some kind of an action in an institution. Now, collective intentionality does not stay on its own. It always imposes a function upon whatever the artifact might be, and in this case, it's going to be a security policy which turns them into a social fact. So, when I say a social fact, it is actually the reality of an implementation. So, assume that you have collective intentionality to comply with certain access rules in an institution, and then that collective intentionality is going to impose a function on the artifact and in the policy, which is going to say that this is how you're going to impose any kind of an access rule. Once that access rule gets implemented in an institution, it becomes a social fact. That means it is going to be ingrained into the fabric of the organization. So, and collective intentions shape assignment of functions, which in turn are based off constitutive rules. Constitutive rules are rules which say, such as X leads to Y in a given context, which would be C. And these generally take the form of normative structures. When I say normative structures, these are culturally ingrained in an institution, which says, well, this is how we do things in this kind of an environment. So that is not necessarily explicitly written, but that is the normative structure within which any organization might be operating. So, collective intentionality in association with dimensions of power shapes how a security policy gets implemented in an institution. So, power, security policy, and individual intention are a triadic relationship, and one informs the other. So, collective intentionality, individual intentions of people shape how power gets exercised. What dimension of power gets exercised more than the others is the resources, is the process, is the meaning, or is the system. And that in turn shapes how a security policy gets implemented or does not get implemented. Security policy in itself, which is an artifact of sorts, once implemented, shapes the intention of the organization or the group of people who are involved in the implementation of that particular policy and gets shaped by it as well. So there's a triadic relationship between organization power, intentionality, and security policy, and one shapes the other over a period of time. It's important to understand that the starting point is not one or the other. In any institution, you are obviously going to have some kind of a security policy in place, which is institutionalized facts of sorts, because that kind of determines how we operate and how we work in an institution. And that in itself is going to shape how power gets exerted. So many times we change security policies largely because, well, with a good intention, of course, that we don't have any breaches, but sometimes with the intent that maybe too much power is residing with a certain group of people, and it needs to be dissipated, and it needs to be reassessed, it needs to be rethought about. Or at times, organizational power is exerted to change the way in which collective intention gets formed. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do, but there are a lot of instances, a lot of examples out there where organization power has been used to influence the intentionality of individuals as well. So I think in a nutshell, I think the three relationships are very important to understand, and one shapes the other. In any kind of a security policy implementation, I do like thinking in terms of two dimensions. One is that of stakeholders, any kind of a stakeholder in an organization, and that stakeholder being aware or not aware of what is happening in terms of the policy, what's happening in terms of the power relationships and intentionality. And the second dimension is that of policy agents. Policy agents are people who are advocating the implementation of a given policy, and in our case, we're talking about security policy. Now, those policy agents being aware of the power relationships or not aware. So if you have a situation where a stakeholder is aware of how power is being brokered and the policy agents are aware of it as well, this is an example of deal making. This is a situation where someone is actually engaging in any kind of deals being brokered such that a given policy gets implemented. Now, in a situation where stakeholders are unaware of whatever the policy power relationships might be, and the policy agents are aware, this is where policy is being forced into a given environment, because only one party is aware as to how power is being articulated. In a situation where stakeholders might be aware but the policy agents are unaware, this is a situation of policy dissent. This is something where you're going to see policies being implemented but people not necessarily buying into that particular policy, and that is problematic, particularly when we are talking about security policies of sorts. And finally, you have a situation where stakeholders might be unaware but the policy agents may also be unaware, and this is perhaps a third individual, a third man who is blindly influencing his or her assertions as to how policy should get formed and what aspects should get implemented. So that's an example of blind influence. So in any kind of a situation, particularly when you look at stakeholders and policy agents, you can have four possible combinations of deal making, policy forcing, policy dissents, blind influences. Now, none of these are good things, but in any kind of a situation, you are going to see a combination of one of the four. It's not the question of choosing between one or the other. It's the question of being more aware as to how a given policy is being formulated and implemented in an enterprise, so that there is least resistance. Particularly, end of the day, we are talking about good stuff happening to an organization. End of the day, we are thinking in terms of an institution or an organization being secure. So howsoever the policy gets formed, process clarity and fairness is very, very important. But there are going to be power influences. Let's be aware of the fact that there are going to be some, and let's be more educated as to what kind of influences they're going to be. So this particular framework that you see in terms of deal making, policy forcing, policy dissents, and blind influence is a way. This is one way of understanding the various kind of influences that there might be in an enterprise.